All right, so what I wanted to do was to do a bit of an update video. We haven't had one in a little while, and since I think 20 was the last one I did, so there's some updates here for 21 through 25 that I'll quickly run through. So we'll start as usual at the bottom and start with some changes around AC, and there were a couple of changes in 21 relating to AC. Sorry, let's quickly go and create a new folder. New folder, blah, 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 doesn't matter. Select. So the first change that happened was we've got this new model up here, which is the channel block. And the channel block is just a very simple model. It looks like a straight line except with larger circles. And each of these dots actually just represents a single channel. And the idea being is it's a way to do old school AC type sequencing where you just got a block of channels. It defaults to 16, which is coincidentally a common size of a certain brand of controller. But you can come up here and you can change that to be 24 if you happen to have a Renard or any other number that you might want to have. You can also go through and set the color of each of the nodes. So you can come in and say, actually, there's something that's red on that channel and there's something that's blue on this channel. And so forth. So you can actually go through and set the channel colors of all of those things. What do we got here? Let's make it 10. All right. Other than that, it's like any other normal model. You've got start channels and everything else, and it just reserves a block of, as you can see here, 10 channels, as you can see from the start and the end channel number. So that's pretty straightforward. You can then sequence it, obviously, and it appears here, and each strand is actually, it calls it a strand, but it's actually each channel. And so if you were to drop an on effect on strand 1, it would of course light up that first one, and it displays it in red because this is a red channel. If I was to move that down, it changes color and matches whichever color I have set for each one of those channels. So that's the first change I made. The second change I made was, to be honest, was to do with the AC. So AC, of course, requires me to put some timing marks in. So let's just quickly throw some timing marks in. And I can, of course, do a ramp up, and most of you would have seen that that's how a ramp up and a ramp down. So I'm pressing a U key or a D key and I get a ramp. But some people will actually prefer to see AC as ramps. And so if you select on the view menu the show AC ramps, it will show you, it doesn't change the effect at all. It just shows the way it's displayed here. And sometimes that can be a little easier to tell, particularly if you're drawing a ramp over a particularly long period. It's obviously very clear that there's a ramp over a very long period there. But if you change it to show AC ramps, you can see when you turn it off, by the time you get down here, it's actually really hard to tell that the effect goes all the way to this timing mark because it gets so dim. And so having those ramps there makes it a little bit easier to see. So that was the two changes that were in version 21. Moving on to version 22, the model group panel got changed. So if we come back here to our layout and throw a couple of models on here for the hell of it. I don't know, let's put an arch. Okay, and we create a model group. We'll add a group. We'll call him Fred. You can see down here, it looks exactly the same. The only difference now is that you can actually drag and drop these things across. You can reorder them by dragging and dropping them as well. So a little bit quicker to manipulate rather than having to play with all these arrows, particularly once the number of models gets really large inside your model group. Creating a custom model from an inbuilt model. So what this lets you do is, I don't know, let's say you want a star, but you've gone and wired it starting from maybe one of the feet of the star, whereas the star model by default wants you to start your star either in the crotch or at the head of the star. And of course now you're all out of luck and you have to go in and create your custom model from scratch. Well, now what you can do is you can come in here and you can export it as a custom xLights model, and we can call that we'll call that a star X model, and then we can come up here and we can import it, and it will bring it back in, and it looks exactly the same except it's actually a custom model, which means you can now come in here and edit the model data. So you can come in here and use the same layout, but say, actually, this is all wrong. I'm going to set the auto numbering here because I actually started here. And I can take advantage of the fact that xLights drew me the star and renumber everything just by going around and clicking on everything, which is kind of nice. It works with a number of different model types. I cancel out of that. It doesn't work with all model types, but it does work with a lot of them. Don't forget you've got to click on it first. Some things like the DMX model, it won't work with, and I don't think the polyline works either, and possibly not the single line either. Oh no, that one does work. Channel block probably doesn't. Yeah, channel block doesn't work. So, but a whole bunch of them do. The arch definitely will. The arch is interesting because it actually draws something that looks like an arch. Now, one of the other things is it won't do is it won't respect the rotation. So if I do something like slew this around and rotate it, and then I was to go and export it as a custom model, like so, and bring it in, grab the arch. Oh, I was wrong. So actually it's brought it in, it's respected the skewing, but it hasn't respected the rotation. And so you would have to go back and re-rotate it. But this is actually a custom model, which means if you go in and look at the model data, the pixels are actually laid out there and you can go and edit them. So some people may find that useful, particularly if they wire their models up wrong. Adding controller and connection details to the node layout. This is kind of hard to tell without a bunch of controllers in here. So let's go and add, I don't know, let's add 10 universes in here. Save that. And now if you come into here and do node layout, there's some extra information that would be displayed up here about the controller. In this case, well, the reason it didn't work there was because I didn't come in here and give them a name. So if I come in here and do a bulk edit, description, I don't know, let's call him Harry. And if I was to come over here and give it a controller connection, save that. And now if I come over here and do the node layout, you'll see that it now lists the controller that it's on, the Pixel protocol, and it actually tells you the number of connections you're going to use and which connections. So it's gone and worked out that this is actually 16 strings, so it's going to use 16 connections on your controller. Obviously, if I was to change that to 4 strings of 200 folded 4 times, it would look the same, but when I do the node layout, now it only uses 4 outputs on the controller. So it's one place where you can go and look to see exactly how that's configured. So that's that one. Add, remove unused layers. Okay, so when you're in sequencing, which of course we are here, and if I was to add, I don't know, let's add 6 layers here, and let's throw some more effects in. and so forth. What you can now do is you can right click here and you can say delete all of the unused layers, and it went through and it removed all of the blank layers on my model. So it will look all the way along the line and any layers that you haven't used. So what this is kind of useful if you've got a preset, you don't really know how many layers are in a preset, or you just want to throw some extra layers in so you can put something on there, and then you just want to clean it up and remove anything that you haven't used. You can right click and do that. Improve model naming. Okay, so model naming used to be a bit of a pain. If you come over here and copy a star, that has become star 3. Oh, sorry, that one's become star 3. And normally what would have happened if I now press Control C and paste it again, that would have been 3-1. But as you can see, it actually worked out that actually, no, that was star 4. And it's actually a lot smarter than you might think. So for instance, if I get rid of the dash and just say I'm going to call that one star 4, and now I copy and paste it, it pastes the next one as star 2. Because it's looked at the star and it's assumed that that's it. So it's gone and created that as star 2. Now it'll create star 3. Now it works out that the next available number is star 5. And so when you paste it, it will create it as star 5. So a much smarter model naming scheme, and you don't end up with crazy names, or not as many at any rate. The test tab remembers settings between sessions. What this one means is when you go into the test tab, there's a couple of changes in here. One is it will now turn the lights on by default. If you're coming into the test tab, the chances are that's what you intended to do. The other thing is it used to default to off. Now what it will do is it will actually remember whatever settings it were that you had it on, including speed and everything else, and it will remember those the next time you come in. So if you've got a favorite test pattern, once you set it, you won't have to keep going back and resetting it back up every time you want to test something. And so that's all the changes in version 22. Version 23, some check sequence additions. There's a couple of them in here. I think if I just quickly run check sequence, I can probably pick them out for you. Couple of ones. I think invalid controller IP addresses. I now do some additional checks on the IP addresses that you give your controllers. If you try and put a controller onto an IP address that's on the internet, rather than one of the private address ranges, it will now warn you, because it's quite uncommon for people to try and control controllers over the internet. It also looks for situations where you have a single model that happens to have universes which are on multiple different controllers or multiple different IP addresses. While that's not invalid, it's generally an uncommon thing that people would do, and consequently we now raise a warning when that happens. And I think that's the main two changes that were added on the back of some problems. Allowing AC sequencing at the node level. It used to be that you could only do this at the strand level, but now if you really want to, and I must admit I struggled with why you would want to do this, but if you wanted to, you could in theory come down to our single line here, open it up, see all of our nodes here, and go into AC mode, which we're already in. And we could sequence down here at the node level. Again, not entirely sure why you'd want to do that, but I was told it was necessary, and so I just removed all the code where I'd stopped it from happening. Fine tuning. Okay, yeah, we did. I fine tuned the UI just a little bit with the AC toolbar, particularly with the Cascade. A number of people were trying to use the Cascade and really struggling with it. And so I made some additional changes just to make it a little bit more intuitive, so people aren't as surprised when it does different things. So hopefully you find it intuitive. Add the ability to manually edit effect timing. Okay, again, I don't know how often anyone would want to use this, but you can now come into an effect here, right-click on it and select the timing, and you can manually adjust things like the effect's duration, start time, and the end time. Again, not sure why you'd want to do it, but you can. Every now and then, if you're not careful, I'll get to a point here. I should get to a point very soon. Okay, where I get this error where effect time clashes. And the reason that's happened is because I've effectively been extending this effect out and it now overlaps with this effect here. And so it won't let me actually save that. I have to bring the end time back into an arrange where it doesn't clash, and then it will let me do it. And Dan added the ability to specify where the circle model starts and stops. So that's back here. The circle model is this one. And there's now a starting location here. So because you can have multiple layers, if we add 3 strings here and create 50, 50, and 50, we get multiple concentric circles, and now you can specify exactly where it starts and exactly which way it goes around. Basically, your options are you start it right at the top here or you start it right at the bottom, and then it's a question of whether it's on the inside or the outside and whether it goes clockwise or anti-clockwise for a starting position. So that's 23. Once we go into 24, increasing the maximum file backed up, when you press F10, it will now back up all files up to 30 megabytes. It used to be 20. I bumped it up. The reason I bumped it up is now that we have this AC sequencing mode, we are expecting people's sequences to get a little bit bigger, and just to make sure that we don't not back some things up. Because we don't really tell you when we don't back things up. If you go and look in the log file, there is a warning in there, but we don't tell you. Increasing the maximum number of nodes per arch on the arches model here. Why is it not grabbing it? There we are, we grabbed it. You can now, you can have 200 or more nodes on an arch. I can't remember what it exactly goes up to, but it's pretty damn high. It's at least 250. It's obviously higher than that. So yeah, you can have a ridiculous number of nodes on an arch now because someone had a problem. Okay, the value curve change I've spoken to at length in another video. It is a breaking change. Since then, not a lot of problems. I've been tackling a couple of problems tonight. I know there are a couple of problems around roto zoom with the value curves. These bugs are interesting because they're actually slightly different. They're not actually related to this change, but this change has exposed them. So I am working on fixing those, but they won't be fixed until 26. The shape effect, I've also done a video on the shape effect, gone through that in a lot of detail, so I won't cover that again. Craig here added a change in the scheduler in the options here, where we allow you to specify a web directory, but it's kind of hard to know whereabouts that folder is. And I thought he'd made a change to display the name of the folder, but for some reason it doesn't seem to be working. So I don't know. Oh, there it is. Apparently you need to do it over the label. There it is. So it's telling you that the xschedule web folder is located in the C program files xLights directory. So that's that one. Allow sequence timing to be changed in the GUI. So Gil slipped this one in while everyone wasn't looking. So here I've got my sequence. If you go up to the settings, which is obviously the gear icon up here, believe it or not, you can actually now come in and change the timing. So you can come in here, set this to be, I don't know, let's set it to be 60, actually, so yes. Okay, so now I can go in and I can set the timing to be something different. Obviously, most people would do something like they go to 40 frames a second or something, and you click OK. Now, the thing it does, oh, it's trying to save the sequence. So the thing it does is it does actually save the sequence, and then it reopens it, because that's the only way that it can actually do the change in the sequence timing. But this has now become a 40 frames per second, a 40 millisecond sequence. So you can now do that without having to go and edit the XML file. Double clicking the grid. So Gil did some things around, he made a change. So you've always been able to double click the grid here and change the label. Gil made an option where you can change this double click mode to be a play mode. And so now when you double click the label, it plays that section. Possibly really useful when you're doing lyric track breakdowns or the like. If you want to get it back to the old mode, you want to edit it, you have to hold the shift key down and double click. It does the reverse. Or if you just want it to be in its old style mode, it's this, you set it back, and in that case, when you double click, it opens up the edit box, and when you shift double click, it does the highlight, but it doesn't actually play. You'd have to manually press the space bar or play to do that. So that's that one. And then so finally 25, couple of things here. This first one here, when you set the scheduler to be a remote for an FPP, which the scheduler here is quite happy to be. There's a mode up here, and you can say, I'm going to be an FPP remote, in which case it will follow whatever the FPP is doing. As long as the FPP is in master mode, it will keep in sync. The challenge is when it gets slightly out of sync, which can happen, how do you get it back into sync? And previously it used to just jump the sequence to keep it in place, and now it adopts the same algorithm that FPP does, where it slowly adjusts itself to get itself back into sync. You shouldn't notice it. You've probably never noticed it in FPP, and you shouldn't notice it here either. Adding the ability to bring in law prop files. So that you see that in the layout tab. If you do the import here and we highlight an area, what we can do is we can come over here and change it to be a law prop file. And then if I go to my downloads folder, I've got some props here that I downloaded. Now, let's grab this one. And so you can see this is quite an elaborate prop. It's brought in as a custom model. This one here actually has two channels for some bizarre reason. The top part of it's done in one channel, and the bottom part of it's done in another. I have no idea why it's been done that way, but it has. And we bring it in, and we respect the fact that it's two channels. You do probably need to come down and change the string properties to not be RGB nodes, but to be single color. And in that case, I don't know, you'll see that it does use the two channels that you would expect it to use. Now, there's some pretty elaborate law prop files out there, like megatrees, etc. You can bring them in. I will warn you, though, that bringing them in is extremely computationally intensive, and the import process can take definitely 30 seconds or more to process some of those law prop files. The part of the reason for that is I try and scale the model down so that the model data is as small as practical. In this case, it's 48 by 64. The data, when it comes in the law prop file, is drawn on almost the resolution of the screen. And so compressing the model down so that it takes up the minimum amount of space and therefore renders well when it comes time to render takes quite a bit of calculation to work out and keep it all looking good. So I will warn you, if you do try to import some of those prop files, expect it to go off to sleep for a while. It's still working, it just takes a while to sort it out. The snowflake shape, look, I probably could have done this better, but it's what it is, what it is. On the matrix here, if I grab the shape effect, put it on, you're all familiar by now with the circles. There's now a snowflake, which, to be honest, is not really a snowflake. It's just a 6, like an asterisk at best. But it kind of looks like a snowflake, and it was easier than trying to put arms on it, etc. I figured it was good enough. Remember the submodel dialog and position? Someone asked me for this, so now the submodel dialog, if I resize it, click OK, and if I go back into it, it remembered where it was, so you don't have to keep resizing it, and it remembers it between models. It doesn't really matter. So once you've set that, it remembers it. I have been making a bunch of changes to the Falcon upload. There have been a number of situations where both the descriptions of the controllers aren't going across correctly, and more significantly, if you've got a second expansion board on your Falcon and you're doing an upload, the upload has been crashing the controllers. Unfortunately, both of those things remain true in version 25. I thought I'd fixed a number of them, but it turns out that there were some other issues around the way in which the Falcon controller was expecting things. They will be fixed in 26. I've got it working quite reliably right now, so you'll just have to wait one more release for that. I'm going to skip over this because I come back to this one. I like this one a lot. Improve effect selection. So yeah, this is something Gil introduced. We're going to be able to see it here. The channel block maybe. So when you unselect the timing, and you highlight the bars, it used to, I think, require you to have selected, I think it used to be that you had to wrap around all of an effect for it to be included, and Gil's made it a little bit more intuitive, where now any effect that you touch is included in the selection, which makes it obviously easier to grab effects, etc. And so finally, I've added an option to the View Perspectives menu, which is this autosave. I don't know about you guys, but I do switch between people's shows. I do open sequences up on laptops and desktops, etc. And to date, we've always stored the perspectives in your RGB effects file. So when someone sends me their show, and I open it up on my computer, I get their perspectives, which usually means it's located on one of 27 different monitors, which of course I don't have, and I have to go and reset everything. Even when someone uses it, they all lay it out in different ways to the way I like to lay it out, and I spend the first 3 or 4 minutes reorganizing everything and getting it right. So what I've done is, if you go up and select this auto save, it's not going to save your perspective in the sequence file, but when you shut xLights, so if I was to, I don't know, I'm going to regret doing this because this is actually the way I like it set up. But if I was to change all of this around, and I'm not going to save it, I'm just going to close xLights. We'll discard the changes, we don't care. We will save those. And I was to fire it back up again. And create a new sequence. you'll notice that everything is where I left it when I was just in it, not the way I previously had saved it. I've never actually had anything laid out this way before. And so it just automatically remembers it. Not only that, it remembers it on this machine only. So when I take this sequence over and use it on another computer, it will use whatever the layout of the screens is for that computer, which means you don't have to, every time you move from computer to computer, go up and choose the perspective that you set up for that computer. And when you load someone else's sequence, such as when you buy a sequence and you're opening up that person's sequence to get it ready to render and save and get ready to import it, once again, when you open up that person's sequence, it will all be laid out the way you like to look at it, not the way they happen to have had their screen set up. And that's it. That brings us up to the end of 2017.25. So I hope you learned something. Thanks, guys.